Okay, just making sure it works. Um, mhm. Okay, so um, okay. So, anyways, welcome back to the live stream. Thanks for those of you tuning in. Thanks everyone for joining. So again, just for those of you who are watching this new, this is a live stream. Unscripted. Today I kind of wanted to talk about price of oil, price of gold, where things are going. Um, I thought it would be interesting to also look at the World Uncertainty Index, and then also look at the geopolitical risk index, kind of see what's going on. UAE just announced they're leaving OPEC next month, OPEC and OPEC plus, and maybe we can talk about a bit about that, the implications on that, um, what that could entail for the future. But I think there's also a broader geopolitical reshoring strategy that's going, and I think this is something that is strategic and a lot more strategic than people. On the surface, I think it looks more like some some erratic policy by Trump, but I think there is some sort of strategy at play here, and it's important to discuss. I guess I guess if I was to kind of start, let's look at um, 1 second. My window didn't open. Can you- Okay, here we go. And go look. World on start. Okay. And I kind of want to open the geo. That one, and then um, yeah, I think we'll start. I think where is it? Trading view. I kind of want to pull this up. So, kind of what I'm getting at here is, um, I guess So I mean, you can kind of clearly see here. So that in it's kind of interesting because I mean, it doesn't look like it looks like it doesn't look it looks severely like right now in the past year and 3 years it looks. What's interesting about it, if you look back at prior years, so like looking at the World Sentiment Index, um, like I guess the global sentiment on I guess whether like the sentiment towards I guess how would I explain this? Basically, I guess people I guess perception of risk. I think that's the perception of risk. I don't know. Anyways, if you look at the World Uncertainty Index, but looking at specific at the global sentiment towards uncertainty, if that makes sense. But I mean, it looks like there's a lot less volatility. I mean, in the past couple of years, there's a lot less volatility, and which is interesting, volatility and sentiment. And I think a lot of that comes from, I think that a lot of that comes from I mean, there's more agreement on in terms of that there is risk. In prior years, pre COVID, it looks very choppy, and I think a lot of that had to do with the differing opinions. People can look at people can look at two people can look at the same thing and have different opinions, different. different perceptions of what's going on. And I think there was a lot after COVID, we saw a lot more clarity, especially after clarity in terms of what's going on. If that makes sense. And so, and I mean, you kind of see this, when you look at the World Uncertainty Index itself, just a spike, the sheer spike in uncertainty. So, I mean, there's a lot more clarity that there is uncertainty. Um, I mean, it dropped slightly back. I believe this was back in September, but I mean, it's still quite. Or is that September? I mean, over the past year, I think this a lot of this is correlated with instability in the Middle East. It's still elevated. I think this is not going down anytime soon. Where is the world trade uncertainty? And this again, this is a kind of consensus. World trade uncertainty, um, world policy uncertainty. I think a lot of the uncertainty from the policy also in part comes from some the U.S. policy, but so, kind of want to poke around at the global risk. So you see, again, the geopolitical risk index, it's risen a bit. Um, yeah, and I guess the BlackRock's part of the reason is against the Middle East war, um, maybe cyber attacks, major terror attacks, Western Hemisphere tensions. Um, where is here it is. I think it's interesting is U.S. and China under Trump. I guess where is it? When was Trump? 2016. No, it doesn't go back that far. It would be interesting, but I think if you look at if I believe I saw once, if you were to zoom out on this, you can kind of see. I'm gonna see if there's another. Uh, does this one have? Ah, yeah. So I mean, you saw it spike in 2016, and then in 20, and then again in 2020. This is the Trump. I guess the Trump era, but then you saw it spike. I mean, when Trump first got in, and then you saw it spike again more in 2020, 2022. Um, that was a break of the. I think this was around the time of October. What year was October? I think it was actually around October 7th. Yeah, I think around October 7th. But I think what's interesting here, again, you're seeing. I mean, it's interesting here is if you were to zoom in most recently, like this entire like just the geopolitical risk. I think there's. I mean, you can see there's been kind of a you see the similar trend here. When you look back after here, we can go to like a very clear example. Like September 2001, after the initial shock of the terror, September 11th, after September 11th, and it kind of eased its way down. It didn't go back to normal completely. I think we're seeing a little bit of the same phenomenon happening here, where it's gone up because, and I guess this is after, the recent. I think in the beginning of last month, in the beginning of last month, they bombed a bunch of. There were a few other series of bombings in Iran, the Americans and the Israelis that hit struck a bunch of other sites, and I think they're still striking sites. And I guess where this leads into what's now, and I guess now the other thing to look into too, at the beginning of last month too, you started seeing a ramp up of attacks on the UAE, which is interesting because the UAE here. Let me just go Google Maps. The UAE is kind of interesting because I saw an interview with their where was it? Here, let me pull up her name. Um, Google. Oh no, what was I? Weekly. I wrote about it in tomorrow. Actually, I wrote about it a bit, so I guess I won't show you the article. It's a sneak peek for tomorrow, but I'm gonna talk about it. You'll see for those of you who follow my Substack, you're gonna see this. We talk about this tomorrow, but no, wait. Um, her name is UAE's foreign state at Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Oh no, that's the other guy. Um, Reem Al Hashimi. She's the Minister of State for International Cooperation. So she basically she also and she was saying, that Iran has been targeting them, and in her words, paraphrasing, she said that, like, they're attacking her because they're everything that Iran is. And Iran is a fundamentalist Islamic country, um, Shia, and I'm not actually sure if they're Sunni or Shia in UAE, but UAE is it's a metropolitan state. They have people of all. I think she said like over 200,000, over 200 nationalities live in the UAE. They have diplomatic ties with Israel. They have open. They're open. They do business with the U.S. And there's a stark difference. Um, they have it's because of the where they it's because of their infrastructure they've built such a tiny place. They've built such infrastructure, such massive great infrastructure here. I mean, Google Maps. Just kind of give you for those of you that wonder where the UAE is, watching this if you don't know. So this is the UAE here, and if you're wondering, this is Dubai, Abu Dhabi. So Iran's right over here. Iran's right across the pond over here, and I guess it's right. So it's right next to the Strait of Hormuz. And actually, they were talking about possibly, the Strait of Hormuz right here, and they were talking about building a pipeline that would go directly to, for like the Faraj to, where's the name of it? It would go from Faraja, which is around here, to Habshan, which is somewhere around here. Anyway, I Habshan, Abu Dhabi. So Habshan oil. There's an oil field around here, and it would be a pipeline that goes all the way to Faraja, and this would bypass the Strait of Hormuz right into the Gulf of Oman, actually. And I mean, this is one option, and I mean that, and I guess that's a side thing, but um, I guess there's something interesting happening. So they've actually been targeted. I think she also made that comment too. That I have to find it. Um, UAE. I can't find it. There was a chart. Basically, if you were to, and I don't have the stats on me right now, but I remember she put up in the video in her interview. She says, UAE, funny enough, has actually been attacked more times, has been hit by Iranian drones more times than Israel, and which is kind of funny when you think about the fact that you would never think, people automatically wouldn't think that the UAE would be such a big target. But I think a lot of it has to do with infrastructure. The Iranians want to control the energy in the region, and part of the way of doing that is to knock out infrastructure, to try and knock out confidence so they won't build more infrastructure. The UAE, she says it's more of a confidence thing. I think it's also an aspect of they don't want competition. Um, it's not just knocking out the confidence. She's right. I guess discourage them from continuing their non. I guess they're secular. They're cozying up to the West, but as well they're also looking to. It's also just the amount what they're able to accomplish. I think they're worried more about competing infrastructure in the energy sector. Um, and I know too that, like, if you look at, here, let me pull up an article that I saw earlier today. Um, Lex, um, so if you look at kind of here, I'll zoom out. if you look at this is and this is kind of where I want to kind of segue into. This is where I want to segue into um, OPEC, the discussion on OPEC, and you know that OPEC has basically the way OPEC works is you have these targets. So every member nation has a quota they have to meet, and they're not allowed to over or underproduce. They have to try and hit that target. And I know some countries will underproduce, so some overproduce to compensate. But in theory, they're supposed to only produce a certain amount of oil, certain number of barrels per day, um, every country. And what's interesting is, the UAE in terms of their ability to what they actually produce relative to their ability to produce. And I saw this chart. I think it kind of puts it into perspective. Um, so if you look at this bottom line here, this is the OPEC quota, and it's risen and fallen, and this is based on the number of barrels per day that they are producing. But then the shaded area is the spread between, and you see here production's above OPEC quota because they over or underproduce typically. But I think they're penalized if they overproduce, meaning they're deducted from being able to produce the next period. So if you overproduce by a million barrels per day this year, next year, you'll be you're minus 1 million barrels per day, if I understand correctly. But their actual capacity, and over the years they've been building up their capacity. This is again where it comes down to infrastructure. UAE's been rapidly developing. They went from like, you look at photos from the UAE in like the 70s and 80s, like it was nothing compared to what it is today. I think a lot of that has to do with their ability to turn their energy infrastructure um, into something viable in the free market. Um, and this kind of shows, the control OPEC had. And I think part of the reason there's a net benefit for the UAE, I think, to leave OPEC, just in and just in the case that it's the same. And it's the same logic of some of the arguments I hear for the people that are pro Brexit. The economic opportunity outside the EU was so great, was great enough that the British were willing to pull out of the EU. I think it's the same thing here. There's such economic opportunity with the West. Um, now, I think that now, if you look at terms of control, we saw first Venezuela. Now, Venezuela is not officially kicked out of OPEC, but after Trump took over, they kind of took a back seat. And I saw some headlines after that happened, and people were, and if you read some of the reports coming out of OPEC, they've kind of taken a complacent attitude towards Venezuela. Well, where we can't control them anymore because now it's Western countries that control the energy in that in Venezuela and the reserves, but we can, but I mean, it's better to keep them so we have a watchful eye. I think that's sort of the attitude that they have, but um, when you look at but I mean, when you look at what's happening then after Venezuela, then they bombed Iran, the US and Israel bombed Iran, and that triggered this whole Hormuz blockade. And I think this goes back into the strategy that, as I was mentioning earlier, I think there is a strategy where Trump is specifically targeting, um, he is going after the major energy, and either cooperatively like he does with like either peacefully like with the UAE and some of the secular Gulf states, or I should say more secular Gulf states or westernized Gulf states. And he's going at and then there's the other aspect of those who don't agree with the West. We have to terminate their ability to compete with us. I think this is major part of this too, is to weaken Iran. Iran and Saudi Arabia are the two de facto like heads of the OPEC. They're two of the larger producers. I don't know if they're the largest. Um, OPEC production by country. There's in this one. Yeah, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Iran are the two largest. Are the three largest. UAE's number four, and this is an OPEC. But yeah, I think there's a bit of Which I mean, yeah, that's interesting actually. I didn't realize Iraq was above Iran, but yeah. Anyways, these guys are Iraq. What is it? Scroll. How many barrels per day? Yeah, that's interesting. But anyways, the I guess I guess that's what happens. Funny pun intended. I guess that's what happens when you divert all your funding towards nuclear programs instead of oil industry. Joke aside, but what do you call it? Um, back to what, sorry, I digressed and I lost my train of thought. Anyways, back to what I was saying was um yeah, I think this is a strategy by the US to try and get their either get them in their get the oil producing countries in his court or eliminate their pricing power. And I mean, this is I mean, I don't think this is going to be returned. The Seven Sisters. For those of you who don't know, and this they call them the Seven Sisters, but pre OPEC there was these seven Western countries from the UK, America. They were all these European countries and sorry European companies, and they controlled all the oil sector in the Gulf. They controlled oil in the Gulf. They were the ones producing. Um, and this is before they had all the national companies come out of the Gulf states, um, and that so I don't think we're seeing that anytime soon. But I think this is again a ploy to try and strengthen U.S. influence in the region in terms of the energy. There's a lot there's a broader objective here. If you weaken OPEC, spillover it'll only weaken OPEC plus, which weakens Chinese and Russian control over energy. And Gulf the difference between OPEC and OPEC Plus is simply regional influence. OPEC is centered mainly around the Gulf, North Africa, and North Africa primarily. I mean, you can see there's some wet South American stuff, but in Central Africa, or like some not necessarily just North Africa, but and in the Gulf, but it's fairly centered around the Gulf. Versus when you go to OPEC Plus, you begin to see Russia, China, and some other like Central Asian countries come in the picture, and that was just I think that was that back then that was the strategy back in 2000. I think it was 2016. What year was OPEC Plus formed? No, 2016. So, and I think too, like this is the whole thing. What I think there's a nice little chart with who's in what. But yeah, so you see centered, and then you have Russia, Kazakhstan, Mexico, Oman, and some Central Asian and more African countries. And I mean, this kind of broadens their influence. Russia and China. I mean, not Russia, China. No, China's not part of it. Sorry, but China. But I bring in China because is would be part of OPEC plus. But I mean, I guess where China ties into this is China relies on Russian natural gas and Saudi Arabian. I'm sorry, not Saudi Arabian. Um, Iranian oil. So if they're if Iran is bogged down in a war, they can't really and they can't really um, if Iran can't really produce, then and or they're not able to export through the Strait of Hormuz, or I mean, even if they run the pipelines, even if they run pipelines and they get it to divert to the Red Sea or past the like through Saudi Arabia to the Red Sea, or they go to I think it was the Gulf of Aden. No, the Gulf of Oman. Even if they go there, like divert, I think that there. I mean, Iran will still. I mean, you still have the U.S. If U.S. brings more control into the region, has more control over the region, it'll be harder for the Iranians to operate their shadow fleets. And I mean, the shadow fleets are essentially how the Chinese are getting discount energy to um to fuel their Belt and Road Initiative. They don't really have they have a major infrastructure problem and they have a major economic problem right now. Um, I mean that's a whole other topic too. I'm not going to get into China. I've talked about them before, but they have a declining population, and they have poor and their if you look at their debt, um, it's despite the positive, the numbers don't make sense essentially. Like they don't have reliable GDP reporting, and they're considered developing. But if you look at their, I mean, I mean, too, a lot of the debt has to do with, again, they're loaning all this money to nations, and I mean, maybe that's another topic for another time, so I won't digress. But essentially, it's a matter of discounted oil, and that's the other thing at play here. I mean, there's the other aspect too. Um, what's this going to do with with the floor? Um, so I mean, like what essentially OPEC's doing by raising by keeping production within a certain band, they're creating like a price floor or a price ceiling, where they so I mean if for example if the price gets too high they increase production. If the price gets too low they cut production. Um, and to increase or to play around with supply and demand, and so they're creating this like very narrow space where they're this very narrow floor, like this basically where they a narrow range where they want the price of oil to go to fund a lot of for the most part to fund their sovereign portfolio to keep prices in a certain range, but also uh, also that's the benefit of the OPEC Plus as well. Actually, OPEC Plus is broader regional beyond the Gulf region, North Africa, and South America. South America, it goes to Central Asia, um, and so Central and Asia and Russia. So essentially, what it's doing, in southern and also near Central Africa, Central or West, East Africa. So what it's essentially doing is it's broadening. It's broadening the influence. I mean, just to throw a number at that, 45 to 50% of well, 40, 45 to 50% of total production it comes from crude production comes from OPEC. Um, so I mean, there. So and what this is doing is if UAE is leaving OPEC, it's slowly chipping away. It only takes a few cracks to begin to show the breaking. And I think the UAE is only one straw. I think we're going to see a lot more the next couple of years. In the next decade, we're going to see a lot. I think we're going to see OPEC um, begin to lose the influence. I don't think it'll disappear, but I think it'll lose the influence. It'll become a shadow of what it was. It'll become more of a shadow of what it is today. And yeah, um, I think the other thing I wanted to talk about was gold. Gold. I was thinking about it. Yeah, I was thinking about it. Um, and one issue, like something interesting. I saw a headline earlier today, kind of on a new topic, I guess. But one headline that I saw today was, what is it? I have it on my phone right here. But someone was saying that comment on, what was it? I can't find it. I think the headline disappeared, but it was essentially a comment on silver, saying how silver has reacted to central bank silver reacting to central bank rates in the like I think it was central bank. I think what was the central U.S. Google U.S. Fed fund. Yeah, I think Canada. Yeah, so I wasn't sure. I think I saw the one that said Canada, but I know the U.S. as well. So Canada held rates steady. Fed funds, they're all, I guess they're also holding rates steady. Um, but they're saying that silver has risen, silver has fell. 1 second, silver. Where's Trading View? silver fell slightly again because of the interest rate. Um, I mean, it's risen again. I mean, it's risen again. I mean, it fell slightly, like here, fell here, and then I mean, it fell slightly, and then, anyways, um, it's very choppy. I mean, it didn't really fall significantly. It kind of like, it kind of like, I mean, it kind of dropped. I think this was yesterday. eh, Yeah, so this was the drop, and then and I believe this is today. Anyways, it dropped and then recovered. It recovered again, but um, they were saying, and what got me thinking, the reason I want to bring this up is because people are now, gold historically, if you let's I mean sorry, not gold, silver historically. I'll get to gold in a minute. But silver historically it's flatline. And only recently and only after like the 2020 thing, after the 2020 that it really start to, I mean we saw something in like I guess September 11th. But other than that, I mean through everything that we've seen in the globe, we only it took the pandemic to break kind of break this trend. Um, and one narrative I want to kind of share on that was, I was thinking about this, and because there's a lot of reasons people will give you, but there's one interesting reason I wanted to talk about why this might be happening is I think there's there's a major shift in there's a major shift in terms of how people view silver and gold. If you look at the price of, here, let me pull it up, gold. hmm Where is it? If you look at, let's close this. If you look at gold, they've kind of behaved similar. They kind of behave sort of like similar pattern. But let's go to here and here, and there. So you can see, I think it's similar, but it isn't. Gold's always been silver's already always been perceived somewhat as a poor man's gold. And what I wanted to kind of show was, silver in some cases reacts looks like it reacts more than it does than gold. But then again, and I think you're seeing, but I mean, you never really saw this. You never really did saw this why, like I never really heard prior to this prior to the past couple of years. I mean, prior to this war with, after October 7th, I never really heard a lot about silver being used as an inflationary hedge. I mean, it was always there, but it was more of it was more, it's more considered. It was always, I mean, the way I always heard about it was always it's a precious metal, and it's cool to have. But it's so common. It's more common than gold. It's cheaper. It's more of an industrial use. They use it in a lot of technology and a lot of when they use it in car parts, catalytic converters, and that sort of stuff. So I never really saw a lot of momentum for it. And then you look to more recently, and you're seeing a lot more. I think we're seeing a lot more of a similar trend. It's becoming more and more, it's behaving more and more like gold if you look at the behavior of the asset. I mean, don't just look at the chart, and I'm not saying this just, oh, I'm looking at a chart and I'm making this comment. If you follow, like, I mean, putting technical analysis or technical quantitative analysis aside for a second, if you were to look at, like, if you were to speak to if you were to speak to the average retail investor, um, and you ask them, and you talk to them about buying silver or gold, one answer that I get all the time when I speak to people about gold is they tell me, the price is very, very high. The price is appreciated, and I mean 4,600. I think that's cheap for where it could be, but um, I think the same thing's happening with. I mean, silver has become a lot more volatile, um, than than it used to be. I think and again, I think a lot of this is because it's shifted. A lot of the retail, um, investors that I know um, will kind of see silver as a viable alternative to gold simply because they can buy more of it, and I think it's more about quantity. And so, I mean, that's just kind of a food for thought, something I was thinking about today when I came across the article. I don't know why that popped up. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's just an interesting thought I had on the price of gold. Um, I know if you're interested, last week I spoke more on the recent trend that's happening. But anyways, I think that's it for. Thanks again for tuning in. If you don't forget to like, subscribe. If you have any comments or if there's a future topic you would like to hear about, feel free to give me. Um, feel free to. I don't know if you have any comments or if you have anything if you have any topic in the future, feel free to suggest it. Um, and yeah, all the best.